Hey y'all, Melissa here with you today, and today's project is perfect for spring. It is this short tiered skirt, and I used a border print here for the bottom tier to make this kind of extra special, but it still has an easy fit elastic waist and it's pretty simple to sew. So meet me back at the camera and I will show you how to draft the pattern for this and then sew it up. Let's make a pattern. So the first thing I did was measure on myself to decide how long a skirt I wanted. And I decided on myself I wanted my finished skirt to be 18 inches long. So that would be this direction. And then I decided that I wanted my skirt tiers to be approximately even. And because I'm using this border print here, I went ahead and I measured from the bottom of a scallop up to where I was planning to cut, and that gave me 10.5 inches. And I knew that I was gonna have to use a 1/2 inch here on top to fold down. So that gives me a finished length for this section of 10 inches. So if this section is 10 inches, then I need the finished width of the top to be 8 inches. Now, I'm gonna overlap at this seam line, so I needed to add another 1/2 inch here, and then I needed to add a casing on the top. So for that, I'm looking at my elastic, and this is 1.5 inches wide, so I need to add another 1.5 inches here that's gonna get folded back. And then I need to also add the raw edge to fold under on my casing, which that's going to be another 1/2 inch. So those combined, that's going to be 2 inches. So I needed to do 8 plus 2, which is 10, plus another 1/2, and that is 10.5 inches here. Okay, so that's what I cut my top tier to be. Now, if I needed to hem the bottom tier, if I was not using border fabric, I would also need to add a hem. So I would probably add about 1.5 inches down here if I was doing a hem. And that way I could fold it twice, 3/4 inches, and have a 3/4 inch hem at the bottom. Then I needed to do math to figure out the width. So I took my hips and then I multiplied that times 1.5, and that number is what I cut for the width of the top tier. And then I took that number and I multiplied it times 2. So top tier times 2, and that is what I cut out for the bottom tier, the total circumference of the bottom tier. So this skirt gets a little wider as it goes down. Okay, once you've got all that math done and you've cut out your pattern pieces, then we'll get to sew. Here is my top tier of fabric. Now, depending on your hip measurement and how full you want this skirt, you might be able to cut this out of one piece and fold it in half like I did here, or you might need to cut 2 pieces to get to your measurement. But the first step after you cut your pieces is you want to get this tier into a loop. So I had to fold it in half and sew down one edge. And you'll notice that I finished this edge with my serger, but you do not have to use a serger to do this. I've got other finishing methods in a different video, and that video is linked below if you need to check those out. If you cut 2 pieces, you would sew down 2 edges, not just one, and then you've got a loop. So you can see I've got a loop here. The next step, because I wanted to finish this bottom edge without hemming it, I went ahead and I did that also with my serger. If you don't have a serger, my suggested finishing technique for this edge would be to do a faux overlock using a zigzag on your machine, and that seam finishing video that I linked shows how to do this. The next step is going to be to take your iron and you want to fold down 1/2 inch here. That was that extra 1/2 inch that I put at the top of the pattern. And then you want to fold down the width of your elastic, which in my case was 1.5 inches. And add about 1/8 of an inch to that just for wiggle room there. And then we're going to sew this casing. So take the fabric over to your machine. You may want to add pins to this. And then I'm just going to sew extremely close to that pressed and folded edge. When you get back near where you started, add about a 2-inch gap, and then that's where you'll stop. So here's my top casing sewn in, and then I'm going to set this up aside for a second. I don't want to put the elastic in yet. I want to go ahead and do the bottom tier. So for the bottom tier, I had to cut 2 lengths of my fabric to use that border print and get enough of a tier to gather. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to gather it to match the top tier. And then I'm going to be pinning these together. So on the bottom tier, I didn't have a lot of extra fabric, so I did an overlock finish on the edge, and then I folded that back 1/2 inch. And I've sewn 2 rows of basting stitches. And I'm going to be stitching this to the top tier right in between those rows. So what I want to do with my basting stitches is use them to gather my fabric. And I want to take my bottom tier and I want to gather it down the same width as my top tier. If that gathering part of the video went too quickly for you, I have a different video linked below that's going to go step through how to gather fabric. And it'll also show some different methods. So once I have this gathered to the same width as the top tier, I want to pin these together. And I want to pin them where the right side of the top tier is against the wrong side of my bottom tier. And I also want to make sure that since I only have 1 seam, that the side seams on my bottom tier are aligned with the side edges, quarter points of the top tier. So I'm going to mark the center front here, and then I'm going to fold that so that it aligns with the center back seam. And this edge is where I want to align the seam from the top tier. And then this edge here is where I want to align the other side seam. And then I'm just going to pin around. And if needed, I can adjust the gathers on each end to make sure that the skirt is matching the upper tier. Once you have that whole tier pinned on, then we're going to take it over to the machine and we're going to stitch it on. Once you have finished stitching this, you're going to want to flip it and check and make sure that you actually went through all layers, that there isn't a hole, because sometimes it can be easy to make that mistake when you are kind of sewing blind because you can't see where the edge below you is. Once you've checked and made sure that that is okay, then you can go ahead and take out the basting stitches. All right, once you have finished removing all those basting threads, Then it's time to insert the elastic in the casing. So to measure my elastic, I just wrap it around myself where I want the skirt to sit and just hold it where it's snug but not tight, and that's where I cut it. To insert the elastic, I'm going to use this tool. It's called a bodkin. If you don't have this, you can use a safety pin, and if you want to get one of these, I've linked it below. So this just clasps onto the edge of the elastic, and then you push the little ring down to hold it tight, and then you go ahead and insert it in the hole left in the casing and use the end of it to pull the elastic through. As you're pulling your elastic through, you want to make sure that this edge doesn't get pulled into the casing, and you want to make sure that your elastic is not twisting as you pull it through. So once you've got the end out, you can remove the bodkin, and then I am going to stitch these two ends together on the sewing machine. All right, I'm using a zigzag stitch on my sewing machine to go over these edges. And then go ahead and pull the whole casing to get all of the elastic into the skirt. And before I make sure the elastic is evenly distributed, I'm gonna go ahead and sew this hole in the casing shut. So I'm gonna have to stretch a little bit to get this to lay flat. And I wanna start a few stitches back from where I ended. All right, once that hole is sewn shut, then I can work on evenly distributing the gathers along the waist by stretching out and moving the gathers along the skirt. I'm gonna cut off my extra threads there. And then once you've got your elastic distributed correctly in the casing, if you'd like, you can sew a couple of vertical seams to keep the elastic from wiggling around. But turn this all right side out, and here is my tiered skirt. Now if you like this project and you'd like some other simple sewing projects, I've got a playlist linked here and you can check that out.